Chapter 15, Breakfast and Bed. The pig man, low in the water, did not realize the danger ahead. Even if he had, it is doubtful that he could have done much about it, so paralyzed was he with terror. All he was concerned with was hanging onto his wooden gate like grim death. This, in fact, was what saved him, for when the current took hold and whirled him off to one side of the dam and over the falls, he held tight. If he had let go then, he would probably have been sucked under by the currents in the pool below and drowned. Felicity, flying toward the other side of the dam, saw the man and his raft plunge down beneath the surface of the water. But then the heavy wooden gate rose up again, its rider still clinging to it, water cascading off the soaking yellow raincoat. Once he's clear of the pool down there and out in midstream again, he'll be gone, with nothing to stop him between here and the sea, thought Felicity. But at that moment, a freakish current dragged the gate back toward the dam, toward a point where a strong branch of the old oak tree stuck out invitingly. If only he'd let go of the gate and grabbed that branch, shouted the duck over the noise of the falls to Daggy, who was standing above watching. Otherwise, he'll be drowned in a minute. Inspiration came to Daggy. Scratch his hands, Felicity, he yelled. Fly down and scratch his hands. That'll make him let go. As the piglet looked on, Felicity flew down, pitched on the end of the gate, and deliberately dragged her sharp claws across the backs of the pigman's tightly gripping hands. Then everything happened at once. The pigman loosened his hold with a yell of pain and anger and grabbed frantically at the branch. The gate shot out from under him, caught the force of the stream again, and sailed steadily away. The duck flew back onto the dam and perched beside Daggy. Side by side, the friends watched anxiously as the pigman struggled to pull himself along the branch to safety. His clothes were soaked, his boots full of water, his tired arms cramped, his hungry body chilled, but he was strong and he was desperate, and at last somehow he scrambled onto the dam. For a while he lay in the tangle of timber, gasping for breath. When at last he sat up and looked around, he saw the two animals watching him, and some color came back into his wet, white face. Drat yer, he cried, shaking his bleeding fists at them, and dang yer, and blast yer. Then suddenly he lurched to his feet. His mouth, open from the last shout, gaped wider still. His piggy eyes glinted, and a kind of mad blundering stumble, he began to clamber over the mess of timber in the direction of the two animals. Hurriedly, the stupid, ignorant duck and the horrible little pig moved out of the way. But they soon realized the reason for the pigman's excitement. Pigman had seen the back of his shed. Above everything else, the pigman was hungry. Excruciatingly, ravenously hungry. For most of the 30-odd hours that had passed since he ran from this shed in the face of the approaching floodwaters, he had thought of food in general, and in particular of some sandwiches left in the pocket of his old apron, the very pocket that had once carried little Daggy, which hung from a second rusty nail beside the hardwood club. They were ham sandwiches, his favorite, and the spittle ran down over his three chins as he fought his way to the door of the shed. He clambered in, and there was the apron. He plunged his huge hand into the pocket, and there were the sandwiches. He tore off the paper in which they were wrapped and crammed them into his mouth. By the time Daggy and Felicity had summoned up courage to peep around the door, the sandwiches were gone, for there had been only two, meant for a mid-morning snack. As they watched, the pigman broke open a sack of pig nuts, picked out a handful, and began to chew them. A cautious look came over his face, then something like a smile, and then he sat down and began to stuff himself. Gosh, he must be full, said Daggy after a while. What do you think he'll do next?" "Don't know what to think," said Felicity. "First he comes floating down the river like a duck, and then he makes a pig of himself," laughed Daggy. "Extraordinary fellow, don't you know?" he said in a passable imitation of his father, and they both giggled in a chorus of little grunts and quoting noises. The pig man had, in fact, decided what to do next. He had never had a deep thought in his whole life, but when certain simple ideas occurred to him, he acted on them without further ado. At the moment his stomach was full, but the rest of his body was wet and cold and tired. His brain, therefore, received three messages: get dry, get warm, get sleep. The two heads looking around the door saw the pig man move slowly into action. First, he took off his yellow raincoat and hung it on a third rusty nail beside the apron and the hardwood club. Then he opened the three big wooden meal bins, one after the other, and looked into each long and earnestly, scratching his head like mad. At the last one, the flaked corn bin, he took off his rubber boots, emptied the water out of them onto the floor, and then solemnly filled them full of the crackly golden stuff. Next he went to the middlings bin. He took off his trousers, his pullover, his shirt, and his socks, and carefully buried them all deep in the brown sawdusty stuff. Then the pig man, clothed only in gray woolen underwear, went to the barley bin. Laboriously, with much grunting, he climbed into the bin and began to work himself down into the thick white powdery stuff like some giant lugworm, burying itself in soft sand. When he was waist deep in it, he reached up to a shelf above for a bundle of old copies of the Pig Breeders' Gazette. He wriggled on down until he was shoulder deep. Then he slipped the magazines under his head, plunged his arms under the barley blanket, and lay back with a sigh. "By St. Anthony," said Daggy mischievously as the pig man closed his eyes. "That fellow's actually going to sleep." And he and the duck burst into another fit of giggles.